Hi, hello, and welcome back to the series on AWS networking. And we are discussing security groups. In our last session, we already covered the theoretical concepts around security group. And in this session, we are going to further solidify our knowledge around the security groups and its properties and its configuration options. So in this lab, we are going to create an EC2 instance in the public subnet that should act as a jump server to connect to the EC2 instances that we have in our private subnet. So in order to have this working, we'll need to configure a couple of security groups. So for security group one, what we are trying to do is we are trying to allow the SSH connections into this public EC2 instance over a public IP address from our home network. And for that, we are allowing inbound rule SSH, but in the source, I'm restricting it to the IP address of my home network, which is a best practice. You shouldn't open up SSH connections to entire world for your instance to be safe from hack and brute force attacks. Yeah. What we're going to do is that also going to install a HTTP web server and deploy a test web page on this EC2 instance. Just demonstrate the other rule which permits HTTP connections, but for all the source addresses or all the source IP addresses on the external network or public internet. So in order to test that later, what we'll do is that we'll use our SSH client to initiate the SSH connectivity from my home network into this EC2 instance. And then we'll take the public IP address and hit it from our browser to access the web page that is running on this EC2 instance. With that, we would validate the configuration of security group one. Once it is created, we attach it to security group one and then test out this connectivity and validate it. So once this is done, in the next step, what we want to do is that we want to launch two EC2 instances within the private subnet. That it means is that it will have only the private IP addresses, which could only be connected or you could only internally route any traffic. You won't be able to connect to these EC2 instances from external network because it's running only with the private IP address. So with private IP addresses, because the public EC2 instance and these two private EC2 instances are within the same VPC, they can talk to each other over the private IP addresses. And taking advantage of this networking concept, if you want to access private EC2 instance 1 or private EC2 instance 2, the best practice is that we use a concept of jump servers. So public one EC2 instance should act as a jump server so that from home network, if we want to access private one or private two EC2 instances, we should connect to the public EC2 instance and then use it as a jump board into the private EC2 instance one or private instance two. But having said that, in order to allow the incoming SSH connections from public EC2 instance into private EC2 instances, we need to configure a security group in order to allow that. So we attach a security group 2 to these two instances, and in the inbound rule, we permit any instance that is attached with security group 1 over SSH as the inbound rule. That means that any EC2 instance, as in this case, like a public one, which is attached to security group 1, is allowed to connect over SSH over port 22 into an EC2 instance that is attached to security group 2. So here, security group 2 being attached to private 1 and private 2 EC2 instance will allow inbound connections from any EC2 instance that is attached with security group. In this case, it is public 1. So public 1 EC2 instance will be able to initiate SSH connections to private 1 and private 2 EC2 instances. So once this security group is created, we'll be attaching the security group to these two EC2 instance, and then we'll log into our public EC2 instance and we'll initiate the SSH connections into private one and private two instances. And once it is successful, we have validated the configuration of security group 2. And with this step, we demonstrate the security group referencing, wherein security group 1 is being referenced into security group 2. So that is the concept of security group referencing, which we covered in our theoretical concepts. Now in the third part, the property that we would see is that how multiple security groups can be attached to a single EC2 instance. So we'll have TechHub Private 2 implement a security group 3 as well in addition to security group 2. And this would allow the HTTP connections, but in the source, it would allow only security group 2 EC2 instances for connecting over HTTP. So with this inbound rule, what would happen is that we'll have a web server running and web page running on private 2 EC2 instance. But because in the source only security group 2 is referenced, any instance that is attached to security group 2 only would be allowed to connect over HTTP into private 2 EC2 instance, which means that because this rule is not applied or security group 2 is not applied to public 1 EC2 instance, it wouldn't be able to connect. But if you go about and add security group 2 to public 1 EC2 instance, you would see that from public 1 EC2 instance, you will be able to initiate a HTTP connection into private 2 instance using the private IP address as well. So let us go about creating these EC2 instances and configuring these rules to see it in action. We will try a few permutation and combinations to further solidify the understanding. So we'll log into the console, and the first thing that we want to perform here is the step 1, that is creating this EC2 instance. I have already created this EC2 instance, and let's move back to the console to see this EC2 instance with the configurations. So once you are inside of your EC2 console, please go to EC2 dashboard, and then you can either create this instance, or as in my example, I have already created this EC2 instance. Now let's explore the networking configuration for this public facing EC2 instance. So I have a public IP v4 address, so I can route my connections into this EC2 instance from my home network or external networks because it has a public IP v4 attached. Now, quickly to have a better understanding on where this EC2 instance is placed, I wanted to place it in a public subnet. Let's quickly have that insight, how this VPC is structured. So I will go to the VPC, click on the VPC description, click on the resource map, and you'll see the layout of this particular VPC. So we have the VPC, and then with this VPC we have 7 subnets. So here we have all these default subnets which are associated with a route table, and this route table is routing traffic to an internet gateway, meaning that all the subnets that are associated with this route table is public subnet, and we just have one private subnet here which we'll later use in our example, but this is just to give you a brief idea around how the VPC is laid out. And the public instance is laid out in a security group that is defined here, that is 14A. So 14A. So basically in this subnet we have our EC2 instance launched, which is public facing. So this was just to give you a brief insight, and if you're interested in further details, please follow the video around VPC and subnets that I have as part of my networking series. So you'll find the description or the link to the video in the description, or you can even follow the video with the card that is getting displayed on the top. Now moving on, let's move back to the console, and from the EC2 dashboard, I have already explored the networking details. Now around the security, under which you will have the security group association displayed. This display is showing that it is associated with the default subnet. So we, as part of our exercise, we need to create a new security group and attach it to this particular instance. So first, let's go back to the slide and see what we need to define there. So we have the instance created. Now as part of next step, I want to create a security group 1, and for this security group I want to permit these 2 rules. I want to allow HTTP or HTTPS connection from all IP address range on the internet, and I want to allow SSH over port 22, but for only my IP and not all IP address range. So we'll put this to implementation now, and let's see this. So if you are in the EC2 dashboard, you can go to the navigation panel, scroll down, and under network and security, you'll find security groups. So once you are in, just click on create security group, and we'll call this SG_1. Please remember, you cannot use this dash in the naming convention. So you can use underscore, and you could also click on info to have like a description on how you could name your security groups. Now, no need of a description, or if you want to add a description, I'll say just allow SSH and HTTP traffic, and that's it. And please remember always that security groups are always created in the VPC scope, so they will always be applicable only within the resources that you have configured within that particular VPC where you are actually creating this security group. Now, having said that, let's add the inbound rule. So our first rule is that I want to add a HTTP incoming connection, and from all IPv4 address range. If you want, you could also allow HTTP connections from all inbound IPv6 range, and this is how it would add. And in addition to that, if you want to say, if I say that I want to restrict the HTTP connections to only my IP address range, then you could just use my IP. So it will just pick the public IP address on which your computer is currently latched onto, and it will just pick that up automatically. So I just don't want to do this. I want to keep it for all IPv4 address range. I don't have any specific requirement around using v6. So to keep it simple, let's keep it restricted to this. Now, another important thing that I want to allow is I want to allow SSH connections, so that I am able to SSH into the public instance that I have just created. And for that, I would say I will specify my IP. It would automatically pick up my IP. Now, one thing to remember is that if you are specifying just one IP address range, as in this case, you just cannot just say, or for example, if you are using a custom option also, suppose if this is my IP address, let me show that to you. Okay, so here if you go, you'll see that it is displaying my IP address as this one, like ending 225, and you'll see here that it is picking up this IP address. So if I want to explicitly allow some IP and not my IP, or if I could use custom option. And here the thing is that if I just use the IP without the CIDR notation, it will not accept. See, it's giving an error. So if you're trying to specify IP without CIDR, please note that if you're applying only one IP, you just have to also add the CIDR notation. So 32 means you are just notifying one IP address. So please remember that this is an important aspect of defining your IP when you're talking about just one IP and not an IP address range. And when you're talking about IP address range, obviously you have to specify the CIDR block with the respective CIDR notation. So having said that, I revert back to my IP and I just say that that's all that I need to do. By default, it will allow all outbound rules, and this is how it remembers that if I am allowing HTTP connection inbound, I am allowing outbound connections also over HTTP, because it is allowing all protocol over all IP range. So that's how it remembers everything. Okay, so that is why we call it stateful. If I remove the outbound rules, if I remove this, that statefulness is gone after that. Okay, so please remember that this is by virtue of which it automatically remembers. So I don't have to explicitly define an outbound rule. Always all traffics over all protocol or port range over all destination is by default open in the whenever you are creating a security group. So let's create this security group. Now the next thing that we are going to learn is, if you have created a security group and you have an EC2 instance that is up and running, how you can in the runtime attach or remove security groups. So navigate back to your EC2 dashboard and select the EC2 instance on which you want to apply this security group. So select that, go to action, go to security groups and click on change security group. Now you see that we have the default security group already attached. Just click on remove and then click on the security groups, and it would populate all the security groups that is currently created. I just have one apart from the default, that is the one that we created just now, and just click on that and click on add security group and just save. I would also like to mention that it is also possible to attach multiple security groups to an EC2 instance, but that's not what we want to do right now. So we'll just remove this one and just click on save. And having done that, when we click on the security group and go to security, you see that now the security group is attached to it, which is security group 1. Now let's have a look at the rules that we have defined. So we are saying that we are allowing HTTP and SSH inbound connections over these sources. So HTTP is allowed over all the IP address range. SSH is only allowed over the IP which belongs to my home network. Now with this inbound rule getting implemented via security group 1 on the EC2 instance, it's time to test out whether these rules are allowing the respective traffic to be redirected into the EC2 instance or not. So first let's validate the SSH connection, and for that we would use a SSH client. And if you want to look for the connection parameters, you could just click on the EC2 instance and click on connect, go to SSH client, and you'll get all the parameters here. For me, I have actually implemented these connection parameters already in my SSH client. So let me just click on this particular connection to check the SSH connectivity, and as you can see here, I am logged into my EC2 instance with private IP ending 168. So let's verify whether that is the IP for the instance that I'm talking about. So as you can see here, yes, this is the private IP for the instance where I'm logged in, and this is being made possible by the inbound rule that has been defined as part of the security group 1, which is attached to our EC2 instance. So this rule is allowing us to go into the EC2 instance over SSH port protocol. So let's see this in action. What happens if we remove this rule? So I'm clicking on edit rule, and then I'm removing this inbound rule which allows the SSH connectivity. I go back to my client, I close this connection, and I again try to reinitiate this SSH connection. And as you can see here, the SSH connection is not being validated. That is because the security group by default is a deny all, which means that unless you have explicitly defined an inbound rule, rest everything is not allowed. So for example, if now we go about validating the rule that is allowed, which is HTTP over the IP address or the public IP address for this particular EC2 instance, we would see that, let me pick up the public IP address for that, and from my browser, if I am entering this IP, I am able to see the web page that I have deployed inside of my EC2 instance. Okay, and this is being made possible because my security group is still having an inbound rule defined which allows HTTP connection from any source. So because I removed the SSH rule from my security group, I was no longer able to log in. Now let's see what happens if I reintroduce that inbound rule to allow the SSH connection. So I click on SSH, I allow it from my specific IP, I click on save rules, and you'll see that this immediately would allow us to go into the EC2 instance over SSH. So here we have revalidated a couple of points that we learned in the theoretical session, which is around the dynamic property, which is the security groups are dynamic and can be changed anytime. The rules can be implemented anytime, and it comes to effect immediately, and there is no waiting time on it. So with this, we are validating this property of dynamic property around the security groups. So remember, whatever rules you apply are immediately applicable to any resources that is attached with that particular security group. On the other hand, I would also like to show you that we can, as part of this dynamic property, we can also attach and deattach security groups from an EC2 instance in the runtime. And say, for example, we go to the EC2 instance, select it, click on actions, go to security, change security group, and suppose if I remove the security group and I say I attach a security group default and I say save, you'd see now that the security group has changed from SG1 to default, and it has some different rule now. So what we learn here is, number one, security group is deny all rules by default. So whichever rule whichever traffic you want to allow into your EC2 instance, or whichever appliance your security group is allowed is attached with, you'll have to explicitly allow the incoming connection, otherwise everything is denied. Another thing is that whatever changes you make to the rules are immediately applicable on the instances to which you are attaching the security group. Third is, you can attach and deattach a rule in the runtime, and you don't have a wait time. So for example, if you have a security group 1 or 2 and 3, you could do it at the runtime when the instance is running. One more aspect to see is, if I go back, so you could attach more than one security group as well to your instances. So I go back to the security, change security group. I already have a default security group attached here. In addition to that, if I want to have my SG1 also applied, you'll see that both these security groups are now applied to the EC2 instance. So these are some of the properties that we explored with the step 1. Now we'll move to the step 2, wherein we will launch 2 EC2 instances in the private subnet, and then we'll apply a security group 2. So first step is that we will create the security group 2. So let's go back and see what we intended to do as part of step 2. So we have achieved this. So we have created our jump server, we have permitted HTTP connection and SSH into this EC2 instance. Now in step 2, we are supposed to create 2 EC2 instances, and then we are going to create a security group and allow the security group 1 over SSH for this security group. So let's see that in action, and then we'll discuss in detail around it. So I would start by creating the security group first, and then going about creating these 2 EC2 instances and attaching the security group with them. So let's go back to EC2 dashboard, and here what I have done is that I have already created a image from this EC2 instance, because I have already deployed a HTTP server and I've already deployed a web page there. So I just want to copy the same settings and I don't want to again do that action for the two instances. So what I did is that I went in and I created an image from this EC2 instance, and that image is available to me under my AMI. So I will be using this image to create two more instances. So I'll say launch instance from AMI and I will call it and I have already selected the AMI. I'll keep the instance to T2 micro. For key pair I'm using the same. For network setting, we need to be sure that we are launching it in the private subnet. So I'll just select the private subnet that I had shown earlier in my VPC. And for the security group, what I will do is that I will create a new security group because I do not have a security group right now. I just have security group 1, and what I intend to do is I want to create a security group called SG_2, and in the description I'll say allow SSH connections from Security Group 1, and this is just a free field, just to give you a description to the rules that you're adding into your security group. So it says SSH, okay, so it is already allowing this SSH connection, but in the source type what you can do is that you can click on custom, and when it comes to custom you could select the security group as the source of this rule. So again, as mentioned, I think I can copy paste this description here, and rather I would say allow SSH connection from SG1 into private instances. And with that, rest of the connections are all default and fine, and I'll just say that let me have two EC2 instances because I wanted two instances. So let me get past this and let's go back to EC2 instances, and I will just rename one of it to private 2 safe. And in the security group, we see that security group 2 is attached to both of these EC2 instances. And when we peek into the security group, we see that it is allowing SSH connections over port 22 from this security group ID, which is security group 1, which implies that any instance which is having security group 1 attached to it will be allowed to SSH into any EC2 instance where security group 2 is applied. Now it's time to put this to test, this rule to test, and for that what we require to do is that we know that we have EC2 instances in private subnet, which is Tech Hub Private 1 and Tech Hub Private 2, and both of them have been launched with the same private key, which is Tech Hub PEM. But all that we require now to connect to this instance is their private IPs. And remember, we talked about the approach that we need to take when we are trying to connect to an instance in private subnet. We need to use our public instance as a jump server, that is from my home network. I log into my public EC2 instance, and from my public EC2 instance I can use the private IP of these two instances to SSH from my public EC2 instance into these private EC2 instances. Because using a private IP, I would not be able to SSH directly into these two instances. And just to show that to you, I can do one thing, and that is I can attempt to create a new connection. So this is the private IP address that I copied for my private instance 1. Username is same as before, Ubuntu, and the private key file is same as before, which is TechHub open. And if I click on OK, you see that this is not going through, and this is because private IP addresses are not allowed. Like you cannot just access it from public external networks. Okay, so let me close this and let me re-invocate the SSH connection from my home network into the public EC2 instance. And the second thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy the TechHub file, because I need that file to authenticate my SSH connection into the TechHub private 1 server. So right now I am in the public TechHub public 1 EC2 instance. So let me show that to you once again. So I am right now logged into this EC2 instance, and from this EC2 instance I am trying to connect into private 1 EC2 instance. So let's go back to the client, and as you can see here, I have already uploaded the private key here so that I can reference this for my SSH command into private 1 EC2 instance. So I'll give the command TechHub Ubuntu @private IP. Okay, I need to copy the private IP. Let me go back here. I copy the private IP and then I just paste it here. Okay, so as you can see here, now I am logged into the EC2 instance which has the private IP ending 73. So let's go back to the console and see which instance I'm referring to. So 73 is referencing to private 1 instance. Now similarly, what I will do is that, so here we are logged SSH or logged into the private server 1. Similarly, the security group 2 also applies to private server 2. So let me initiate a new session, and again I will do is that I will initiate a new window and new session in a new window to my public EC2 instance. Again, let me use the slide to show you. So I am opening a new session, SSH session, into this EC2 instance, which is the public EC2 instance, and from there I will be parallelly connecting to private 2 server. And so for that, let me go back to the console and let me pick up the private IP address from here. So it's 195. I copy this and then I go back to my client, and from here I already have the TechHub file, as you can see here. So all that I need to do is I need to issue the SSH command to the private instance 2, and you can see that we are under inside of this EC2 instance. So basically the public instance is just acting as a jump server to SSH into these 2 private EC2 instances. And with this, we see that the security group rule that allows the instances attached to security group 1 to SSH into the EC2 instances that are attached with security group 2 is getting validated. So this rule is getting validated with this action, and this is an example of the security group referencing which we saw in our slide here. So we saw that if we have instances which are associated with security group 1, and then if security group 1 is being allowed to SSH into instance that is attached with security group 2, all instances attached with security group 1 will have access to instances that have security group. This is an example of security group referencing for you. Now let's move to the last step, and in this last step what we wanted to see was from private instance 1 I want to access a web page that is running on private instance 2, and for that I need a inbound rule that is allowing HTTP connection from private instance 1. So we have already seen that we could attach multiple security group because security group 2 is already attached to private 1 and private 2 instance. Now I will add one more security group, create one more security group, and in this security group I will permit any instance that is attached to security group 2 to be able to access the port 80 for private instance 2. So let's put this to implementation, and with that we will be concluding the lab exercise. So let's go here. So we have security groups, and in this we have to create a security group called SG_3, and I'll just say that allow HTTP connection for SG2, add inbound rule, just say I want to allow HTTP from SG2 and add rule. No, I don't require any other rule, just create the security group, and then we go back to the EC2 instances and click on instance. So I want to allow HTTP connection into private instance 2. So I'll just, and for that I can use the security group 3, because in security group 3 I have allowed the HTTP connection, inbound connection. So whichever instance I want to allow inbound connection from security group 2, I could attach security group 3 to that particular instance. Click on action, go to security, change security group. We have security group 2 already applied, and remember we discussed that we could apply multiple security group to one instance. I'll just add the security group and I'll save. But remember, I'm not saving it now, right? Because what I want to do is that I want to show you how it, whether it is allowing or not allowing the connections right now. So here we are in the private instance 1, and here we are in private instance 2, 195. Okay, so on 195, let's see localhost. So I have it running here. I have a hello world running on my HTTP server, a demo page that is being shown. But whether I'm able to access this web page or this content or this, whether I'm able to access this web page over HTTP from my private EC2 instance 1, and for that what I would require is the private IP of instance 2, and for that let me go back to EC2 instance and let me pick up the private IP for Tech Hub 2, which I'm trying to access over HTTP port 80 from private 1. Let me go back to the client and I'm trying to give a curl command to private EC2 instance 2 from 1, and this curl command is not resolving because the rule is not yet implemented in the security group, okay, or that security group is not yet attached to the EC2 instance, which allows the HTTP connection. Now let's go back to the console. So the tech hub private 2 in the security, you'd see, has only security group 2. Security group 2 is only allowing SSH connections, and there is no HTTP connection getting allowed right now. So I have two options. Either I can allow incoming HTTP connection by editing inbound rules. I could do this: HTTP from source, from any source. Here I could say SG1 or SG3, or I could say from any source, or I'll just cancel this, or I already have a security group 3 which allows HTTP connection from security group 2. So all that I need to do is attach this security group to that instance, because that instance doesn't have it. So I go back to my instance ID, I say action, I say security, change security group, pick up security group 3, add the security group and save. Now this instance, if you look in the security, it is attached to security group 3 and 2. 2 is allowing only SSH, 3 is allowing port 80. You can see here, 2 is only allowing 22, 3 is allowing port 80. Now if I give that curl command from my instance 1, so private instance 1 is giving a curl call to private instance 2, and you could see that it is returning the web page as mentioned here. So with this, you see how security groups are configured and how security group referencing is made to work, and this is part of the security best practices when we are working with security groups. And it is always good to use security group referencing because it gives you a very granular access, because all the instances wherever you are applying the security group, they all will attain the attributes of the security group, and you don't need to go in and change the rules for each of the security groups. So whatever you apply on a high level on a security groups get implemented across all the instances that are. This is especially useful also in the case wherein you are having a auto scaling scenario wherein you are horizontally scaling your applications by adding more servers, and in those scenarios same property can be applied as your instances scale up and scale down. So with that, we conclude the session on AWS security groups. I hope you have a better understanding with the theoretical concepts and the hands-on session that we covered here, so you will get a good insight into the security best practices revolving around the security group. And I suggest you to please stay tuned with more concepts around AWS networking and follow the videos for the best practices around these networking components. Thanks for watching.